Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. I've never made a video on the so-called Dendera light bulbs before, but I think now is the time to dispel one of the myths of the ancient world, that these ancient reliefs in the Dendera Temple of Hathor are in fact depicting ancient light bulbs. People use these images as prime examples of lost technology of the Egyptians, but we must remember that dynastic Egyptian history covered nearly 3,000 years of time. For example, the builders of this temple are not the same people as those that built the pyramids, according to the conventional timeline of ancient Egypt. Yes, there was building work at Dendera around 2250 BC by King Pepi I of the 6th dynasty. But the Temple of Hathor and most of the Dendera structures we see today are late Ptolemaic or Roman. That's more than 2,000 years since the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. So, even if these were light bulbs, it doesn't imply that the Old Kingdom or even the New Kingdom Egyptians had the same technology. I've shown before how the Dendera zodiac is actually a Babylonian copy, including many clear and obvious Babylonian influences in the zodiac signs, and created late in dynastic history. Dendera isn't a very ancient Egyptian structure, and you can even see that column sections were used in the temple's foundations, columns from earlier structures that must have been razed to the ground through the country's turbulent history. So, as stated, even if the Dendera light bulb was a light bulb, all it would be telling us is that the technology was around 2,000 years after the 4th dynasty, and around 1,000 years after the 18th dynasty, and has no bearing on the great eras and pharaohs that we all think of in the history of Egypt, unless of course the knowledge was passed down through the generations. So, how are these interpreted as light bulbs? Those that promote the idea are projecting the image of modern technology onto ancient imagery, like those that say that this famous picture shows an Apache helicopter. In my opinion, it's not the best way to try and interpret iconography of the past. These light bulbs are found on 3 stone reliefs in the temple, and yes, they do look similar to a crux tube with a lotus flower socket at one end, a cable travelling underneath it, and a snake-shaped filament inside. The bulb is inclined upwards, supported by a 2-armed jet pillar, whilst a baboon stands in front of it holding 2 knives. Austrian authors Peter Krasser and Rainer Habeck brought the hypothesis to the world in their book shown on screen, with the title translated to Light of the Pharaohs, High Technology and Electricity in Ancient Egypt. Working models of the so-called light bulb were also made, and the fact that they were operational felt like some kind of conclusive proof that the reliefs at Dendera were in fact showing us light bulbs. Now, I am a researcher that likes to question everything. Someone who likes to look at the evidence, scientific, archaeological and written, to try and find the most likely explanation to the curiosities we see. And so to completely disregard the Egyptological explanation for the Dendera light bulbs isn't very good research. We have to hear what they have to say. So, what do they say? Because we are not just looking at potential light bulbs on a stone panel. We see writing around it and also other images. We are looking at a larger scene, and the proponents of the light bulb theory rarely mention the bigger picture. For example, you don't just read the part of the Bible that says that Jesus died on a cross and his body was placed in a cave, else you'd think it was just a document talking about a criminal in the Roman world. Context is critical. You probably wouldn't be surprised to know that the writing around the light bulb makes no mention of filaments, wires, and instructions for turning on an electric light. What it actually says is as follows. Harsomtus, the great god who is in Dendera, who rises from the lotus flower as living bar, whose perfection is risen by the images of his car, whose image is worshipped by the crew of the day barge, whose body is carried on the jet pillar, below his image the primeval beginner, Hathor, sits and whose majesty is carried by the companions of his car, requires 2 AA batteries. Okay, I added the last part, but that's really to highlight the fact that the image obviously has a meaning that has nothing to do with lighting and electricity. Harsomtus is a kind of creator god. Horus the unifier of two lands, and as the text says, he is the snake rising from the lotus flower, with his body being carried by the jet pillar on the day barge, which is what others call the power cable. To interpret the Dendera lightbulb scene does require an understanding of ancient Egyptian mythology, which makes sense as the scene is inside an ancient Egyptian temple. If the mythology cannot explain something, then we do need to call upon experts in other fields, but the Dendera lightbulb scene has never been a problem. And this isn't just me blindly believing Egyptologists, it is simply because there is text around the bulb that explains it. The first thing to emerge from the infinite primordial sea of none, also referred to as the Sea of Two Knives, was, surprise surprise, a lotus flower. The flower is said to have given birth to the sun god, Atum-Ra. A snake in a kind of bubble is a common way to represent Atum-Ra, and may be a representation of the emergence of the universe out of nothingness. The Dendera lightbulb is actually showing us the emergence of the sun god from the lotus flower. It is a straightforward interpretation based on well understood mythology. Here we can see another snake located close by the Dendera lightbulb, this time without a bubble, but also rising from a lotus flower on a barge. So, a mythological interpretation for what the Dendera lightbulb really is certainly seems to be compelling. Clear iconography from creation stories, with significant gods, ideas of rebirth and so on. An interpretation backed up by what is actually written next to it. Still, not everyone agrees, and many still believe that this is evidence that the ancient Egyptians did harness electricity. Even though, as discussed in the Ancient Origins article linked below, there is an absence of historical texts discussing anything like electricity, and there are also a lack of ancient electrical items found in the archaeological record. Some say that this is because the secrets of light and electricity were kept only by an initiated few. Ancient priests and royalty who had their own secret ceremonies away from the masses, meaning the missing artifacts and knowledge are now hidden away or were in fact ritually destroyed. But obviously, there is no evidence for any of this, and it really is all guesswork. If there was no written text next to the so-called lightbulb, then alternative ideas would have more credibility. But in this case, they just aren't required. It's funny because the modern world will always trick our brains into thinking a certain way, assuming that ancient people would create electrical lighting in the same way as modern humans, or that ancient Egyptians independently designed and made Apache helicopters and even Star Wars landspeeders. Of course, none of this is true, but none of this should take away from the breathtaking Dendera temple complex. It is one of the best preserved temple complexes in Egypt, covering an area some 40,000 square metres in size, with a large mud brick wall surrounding it. As stated, there was a structure that was built here by Pepi I of the 6th dynasty. There was also a temple from the 18th dynasty, but what we see today are all late period constructions. The Temple of Hathor specifically started life in the Middle Kingdom, but work was done on this structure right into the Roman era under Trajan. The existing structure is late Ptolemaic, and the adjoining hypostyle hall is Roman. The Dendera zodiac is Greco-Roman and seems to combine ancient Egyptian and Babylonian iconography, and also seems to commemorate the date of 51 or 52 BC, as discussed in a previous video. The temple also has 12 subterranean crypts, all dating to the late Ptolemaic period. But it is the Dendera lightbulbs that seem to have brought the Temple of Hathor to the world's attention. But I must say, it's a temple whose ceiling was cleaned in recent years, revealing spectacular ancient paintings, some of the most vibrant and colourful from antiquity. But why did the ceiling need cleaning? Because it was covered in thick black soot from hundreds of years of burning torches and oil lamps, which does seem very strange if they had just invented the electric light bulb. There are real mysteries in ancient Egypt. There is much debate over the age and origin of the pyramids, what their function was when they were built, and there is still no obvious explanation for these drill holes in granite, or how these vessels, created from hard igneous rocks, were made. these things still play on my mind, but I must say I do think the case of the Dendera lightbulbs is case closed. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.